All right, well, welcome everybody. Today's session, we're going to basically be reviewing a few of the reopening scenarios that my education strategist team and myself have been reviewing for the entire United States. And then we're also going to put those into perspective based upon the California Department of Health guidance, the CDC guidance, and then also the reopening guidance that California Department of Education released last week. That was a 68-page document, which we went through and read in its entirety. So all of our recommendations and everything that we're going to share with you today are based upon those guidances. And this session is also meant for it to be a roundtable discussion. So after every slide, I'm going to open it up to any of the participants to unmute their mic and add to the discussion, ask a question, or even mention to the group what they are currently doing in their district or what scenarios they are most likely going to be using when we open again in the fall. And I decided to use this image right here at the beginning because this is an actual image that I took on my campus. And to me, it represents, even though, uncertainty and darkness looks like it lies ahead, there's always going to be a rainbow at the end of this. When we focus on kids, when we focus on the learning outcomes, when we focus on that, we are always going to be doing the right thing. So if we always put that into perspective, we're always going to be working correctly. So to introduce myself, my name is Joe Marquez. I'm an education strategist here with CDWG. In the past, I was a secondary science teacher and instructional technology specialist for my district in Clovis, California. I do have a master's degree in education technology, and I have a few different certifications, such as the Google Innovator certification and the Microsoft Innovative Educator certification. And I just once again want to thank our summit sponsors, who without them, this summit would not be possible. Now, our state superintendent, Tony Thurmond here in California, basically said when he released the guidances that we want to make sure students are still receiving a high quality education, but also be safe in doing so. And even though it may be difficult to imagine how we're going to do that, we must rise to meet that challenge. And I've never seen any educator, any administrator, never rise to the challenge to meet the needs of our students. So no more so than now do we need to make sure that we are utilizing everything we have. And I also want to make sure that we utilize a quote that I always love to mention, and that's by Nelson Mandela. And it states, "It always seems impossible until it's done." It always seems impossible. The future may seem impossible. These next few months may seem impossible to implement, but it will be done and we will get it done. We just have to keep that in perspective. And I also want to make sure that you understand here, I'm not going to try and sell you anything. That is not my purpose. I want to basically provide you with some of the solutions that we see around the country that other districts are adopting. And we also want to make sure that it is clear that we encourage districts to use all the resources they currently have and use those resources to the best of your ability. And if you do need extra resources, then you can think about utilizing some COVID funds or some extra funds to purchase those. But we always encourage innovative uses of your current technologies or current resources before you start outsourcing anywhere else. So the 5 scenarios that we see across the United States, and they here also in California, are these 5 right here. And we're going to go a little bit more in depth with each one of these. But it all starts with business as usual, meaning we're going to have all the students come here on campus no matter what. We're going to start school at our normal time. We're going to bring every kid, hoping that they're going to be able to make it. And we're going to talk about some of the pros and things you're going to have to be thinking about if you choose that model. Another one we see quite frequently is the adjusted calendar schedule, meaning some schools are, even though they're a regular scheduled school, they're looking to a year-round model to have some at least paddings of months where they could actually do some distance learning at home. We see some schools looking to push the calendar start date farther towards after winter to ensure that all the students and their staff are safe. So that's the adjusted calendar setting. Next we see, this one is the most popular, and that's the on-site / remote, better known as the hybrid model, where your teacher will be in class to half their students on one day, and the other students will be at home remotely. And the next day, they will convert. They will switch. So the students that were home on one day will now be in school the very next day. And so we see this model picking up as well. Another one is the adjusted or flexible schedule, where you have some students showing up at the beginning of the day and other students showing up in the PM later of the day. So that is that adjusted schedule that we're seeing as well. And then finally, something schools, I know they're looking to not implement, but it's something they still have to keep on their mind is full remote. And I want you to be mindful that we, even though we've been in a full remote mode since March, this is not a true distance learning scenario. This was a panic learning scenario, right? It's what I like to say is, like, if you were to ask a skydiver while they're falling out of a plane, never been prepared, just being pushed out, how do you like skydiving? They're going to say it's scary. But if you have prepared them and they've done practice and they've actually gone through all the necessary courses, they see it as not so scary. And I think that a lot of teachers felt like they were pushed into this and they weren't prepared. So this was not true distance learning. It was panic learning. And I think a lot of our educators rose to the occasion and they actually met the needs of their students. But we have to make sure that they are well prepared to ensure that they're getting high quality education, no matter which scenario that is being selected. I'm going to pause for a second and I'm going to see, is there anybody out there who would like to comment or who would like to mention what their school is looking at doing in this fall coming up?
Well, I know that we left our Chromebooks with our kids, preparing to keep it full remote starting in the fall. But our superintendent up here in Washington said, we're going to go to business as usual, but with, just like what you said, masks on, and we're going to try to stay 6 feet apart, and even go into classes when they're out at recess are staying together and not intermingling with other classes, which I find very unusual, and I don't know if that's going to really work.
Yeah, David, and I thank you so much for speaking up. One of the hardest things in a virtual session is to make sure everybody is participating, which, is a great modeling for when we're working with our students, right? Why are the students so quiet? Marilyn, I see that you've raised your hand. I love that you're using the Zoom functions. Marilyn, could you please go ahead and give your perspective as well?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Marilyn Rocky from the Live Oak School District, Del Mar Elementary School. And I just love this opportunity to share with my colleagues across the board. This is amazing, from different states, and because we're all one, right? We're all going through this together, and it's just an amazing time to join hands and brains. So what we're doing in our district, we currently are on our second survey, assessing what the parental need is in terms of childcare on or off-site, in terms of what model works best for parents and their working schedules in order for California to open back up again. And our survey results are almost all in, and currently it looks like the majority of parents are really preferring an AM model. So we had 4 different options that we looked at. One was the total remote model. One was an AM model. We call it the split hybrid, where students come in the morning, those that want to be on site, cohorts of 12, and then we have a group that wants to do remote learning. So a teacher might have 24 on his or her roster, but physically brick and mortar maybe half that amount, and then the rest at home. Then we also had an every other day alternating schedule offered. So we're waiting to see those results and trying to adjust according to what the family's needs are. But in terms of what David said, David, I was with you. Absolutely. The whole thing sounded weird about kids being in a cohort alone together. But where I am right now, I'm in my office and looking out my back door on our site, our amazing child development coordinator, Melanie Sluggett, started the guinea pig program of bringing our children back who needed childcare, essential services. And so she has what we call summer camp going here. And I'm watching, and it's shocking. And of course, children are so resilient, and they are actually, with their pool noodles, stayed 6 feet apart. Some are masked, some are not. The hand washing routine, everything is falling into place. And I'm just very happy to see that. I was very worried about, how's that going to affect them socially, emotionally? Don't touch each other. No hugging. So anyway, that is part of what's going on in our school district. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Absolutely. And Marilyn, I love the fact that you have the community involvement, because that is a key piece in making a successful rollout for the fall semester. And I do want everybody to know that you can do this community involvement in a variety of different ways, right? You can send out paper flyers and asking responses there. You can send out a Microsoft form or a Google form to do that. And there's a variety of other companies out there that can do all the entire form collections for you. A company like Bright Bytes can do the entire thing for you. So there's a lot of different ways you can get the community involvement, but you absolutely need to make sure the community does have that involvement. So I appreciate it, Marilyn.
Joe, if I could add one more thing, tonight I'm having my second town hall. We call it the town hall parent meeting, and we're doing it via Zoom again. And it was horribly intimidating the first round and very scary, because I had like 120, 130 parents in and out of that meeting. And it was just terrifying. And I learned a lot from the experience about how to have a facilitator and somebody to monitor chat and all that. But so we're having our second one tonight. And I agree, because when parents know that they have a voice, they're not leaving our public schools as much. And for me, that's the biggest piece, is please don't leave us. Don't leave the public school system. You have to have faith in us, because we are the ones here for you. This is where it all begins and ends, you know, social justice, racial justice, public school. So anyway.
Yeah, and I love the fact that, you know, we always have to look at positives of the COVID instance, right? I mean, because there's a lot of things that we can say that have been negative, but some of the positives is that these virtual meetings have become more of the norm. And I'm hoping that even when things do come back to normal, that we do continue to have town halls and allow parents to join virtually. We do continue to have board meetings virtually so parents can join in as well. Because the more voices we have, the better we will be with our community. So I love everything that you are saying, Marilyn, because those town halls are incredibly important, because we all know that when people feel their voice is being heard, they are more accepting of what comes out of it. And so I love that fact. And we're going to talk a lot about this as well. And the fact that you were intimidated by having all of those parents join on a Zoom meeting, sometimes that's the same intimidation that teachers have when they're having to teach virtually as well. And I always tell teachers, you don't have to do this all on your own. You can always select every week a fellow student, a student in your class, to be the class moderator for that day. They love the opportunity to be that moderator, like they have a little bit of administrative, not, I wouldn't say power, but they love the fact that they can be able to do that in the chat. So I always recommend to teachers, don't feel like you have to do it alone. You can ask your students, because they love to help. So we're going to talk a little bit right now, and I told you each one is going to be broken down a little bit for us. And the business as usual, a couple of the benefits of this is that since students will be coming to school every day, parents don't have to deal with, what am I going to do with my child, because I'm going back to work now, and my students, you know, are going back to school. If they weren't going to school, what would I do with them? And I know that in education, our job isn't childcare, but it is still something we have to be mindful of in these situations, because we never want to put a parent in the situation of, should I send my kid to school? Should I not? I have to work. Should I stay home? We never want to put them in that. And, you know, it's easiest to implement this status quo. Hey, everybody come to school. When I say easy, it's going to be in air quotes, because there's going to be stipulations, because we still have to maintain social distancing. So if you are still doing the status quo model, you're going to have to start implementing spaces that were not educational spaces to begin with. You're going to have to start using the cafeteria for larger classes. You're going to have to start using the gym. If in California, when the weather is induced and conducive of it, we can teach outside. One of our LEAs, which is a learning environment advisor, Maureen, she said that, you know, because the summer wedding season may not happen to the capacity that it normally does, you're going to have a lot of rental places wanting to figure out how they can rent their tents out. And education is a great place to do that. Contacting your party supply company, say, hey, can we rent this large tent out for 6 months? I mean, now you have an outdoor space, and you can just move those desks outside. You can use those foldable picnic desks. So there's a lot of different ways that you can implement this status quo, but you still have to be mindful that you still want to be guided by the CDC and California Department of Health guidelines. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of schools look at are mobile dividers or desk dividers. The 6 feet apart is when there is no division between the student. But if you do have something like a plexiglass divider in between, you can have more students in the classroom. And if I click on this, and remember, if you all select that bottom, the cdwgets.it/CDW feedback, you'll get this exact copy of every slide that I'm talking to you with all of these links. But in mobile dividers, you have things that can be purchased that just grip on to your current desks, or dividers that can be rolled in between. And I always say, I love this divider one here for the fact that we want to be purchasing things, if we do have to purchase, things that will be utilized even when COVID is over. And these rolling boards can be written on, so they can be used as mobile whiteboards when students are going through. So I always say, make sure you're using something that can be used after the fact. Don't use something that is done right now. We also have to make sure that we understand that teachers and students in the California guidelines state as long as they're over 3 years old, they should be wearing masks. Now, that's going to be a decision at the local level, but at the bare minimum, teachers should be wearing masks. And how are you going to make sure that their voices are not muffled? How are you going to make sure that they're still able to not only present to their students clearly, but effectively as well? So if you do have any audio enhancements like front row or light speed, those are always great to utilize, because they can also be utilized after the fact as well. And I put in here for you as well, because I found a great mask template where I see a lot of K3 teachers utilizing this. They make their own masks, but they actually cut a window out and use a washable plexi. And so you can actually see the face of the teacher, because we all say, I hear teachers saying all the time, I don't want to wear a mask because then my students can't see me smile. This allows the teacher to still be able to smile and be able to showcase, vowels and their words, especially for ELL students. So that is a great opportunity as well. So that is the business as usual. There's still aspects of it that you have to take into account, but that is the business as usual model. Does anybody have any comments at all on this model before we move on to the next? Excellent. So the next one that we have here is the adjusted calendar model. Now, the adjusted calendar model is the model in which you're going to change when you start. So like it'd be a later start date, or you're going to add additional days. If you have a 180-day schedule, you may add 200-day schedule, just because if we do need to shut down for a period of time, we don't have to be worrying about what are we going to do at the end to meet that 180-day requirement. So adding on extra days just for those partitions. And then some schools, like once again, are looking, even though they're not a year-round school, they're looking at that year-round school to have buffers in between in case they do have to alternate or change that schedule. So one of the benefits of this is, if you do start later, it's giving time to train teachers a little bit more. It's giving time for them to figure out ways to address the academic needs of their students. And then it also provides time for that remediation or acceleration of the learning. We do have to make sure the considerations are, we're going to have to be doing remote at times. So teachers still need to be trained on how to remotely teach. So they're going to still need to be able to utilize the Zoom or the Google Meet or the Microsoft Teams. They have to still know how to use it. So reinforcing, hey, even though you do have students in your class and you're not teaching at a distance, use it to record your lesson. Just use it to archive your lesson. Just keep the practice up so that you don't lose it if we do need to do it. And also we have to be mindful of this, and this is for the same one as status quo. We have to make sure not every parent is going to be okay sending their students back to school. They still have this mindset that it's not safe. It's funny because my wife is not an educator, but we have 2 little girls. And I keep asking my wife, when are we going to start sending our daughters back to daycare? And she says this to me all the time: what has changed? What has changed? Is there anything that has changed? And I'm like, well, she goes, no, we did social distancing for a while and now we're trying to move back to normal. What has changed? She goes, I don't feel safe sending them back. I can see many parents feeling that same way. So even if you do status quo, or even if you do this adjusted model, we have to take into account not all students may return. So we still have to figure out a blended learning solution. One way that we have thought about, and we've heard schools think about this, is they're also might have teachers who are not ready to come back. There may be some teachers that are older who are in the age group that's more conducive of catching COVID and it being worse. So those teachers who may not want to return, they can be that distance learning teacher teaching the students who are being taught at a distance as well. So that's another model that we're looking at, that we've seen. And then finally, still purchasing or having some kind of divider so that you can have more students in the room and not really have to do that 6 foot because you have that division in the middle. So these are some options that we see happening with this adjusted calendar setting. Before I move on to the next scenario, would anybody like to comment or mention anything that I may have missed? What about teacher? Yes, exactly. No, David, that is a great thing as well, because I hear teachers saying, hey, I may not be in the vulnerable category, but I don't want to not see my parents during this entirety of the time, right? You can't put me in a situation where I either teach or see my family. Which one? So what about those teachers as well? I love that you brought that up, because that is an absolute scenario that schools must look at. And do schools provide the mobile dividers? And that's a decision that a district's going to have to look at, right? If you can't meet those 6-foot requirements, if you don't have enough spaces, but you still want to bring as many students in, looking at those dividers is important. But also make sure you're looking at dividers that can be used for a long-term assessment, not just a short-term need. Purchasing things for now and then not needing them later, you have to be mindful of those funds. So make sure the things that you do purchase can be purchased for the long term in the classroom, not just a short term fix. And absolutely, Jason, you know, it cuts the funding, right, are one thing, but cuts the funding and then asking schools to purchase things they weren't prepared to purchase in the first place. That is another issue that we're looking at as well. And that is why my education strategist team and our LEA team says to schools first, before you consider purchasing anything new, look at what you currently have. Bring teachers in, bring community members in, and start kind of having a brainstorming session of how you can innovate, be creative on using these things that we're looking at. One of our LEAs, Santino Martinez, said he saw a 150-foot roll of yoga mats. And he said he's seen schools buy this roll and cut little seat partitions out. So kids bring around these yoga mats, put them on their seat, and now they have that space between them and the seat because of that yoga mat, and they keep it and move it around. And that 150 roll of yoga mat is only $150. So being innovative with these funds, finding ways to utilize things that don't cost a whole bunch of money, or figure out ways to purchase something that can be used for the long term, are very, very, very important. But make sure you absolutely are looking at what you can use for the long-term investment. And also look at your COVID funds. We have heard that the California Department of Education is going to start releasing those funds sometime in July. And there is a variety of uses that you can use those funds for. So if your department doesn't know what those funds can be used for, make sure you either look up the COVID, or you can contact us, because we have a whole scenario on that. We even have a podcast called CDW Gets that goes over everything you can do for COVID, everything you can do for hybrid teaching, everything you can do for social distancing. We have that, and I'll give you the link to that at the end of this session. But we do that to provide answers in a short amount of time. But if you do want to have like a consultation of what can we use our COVID funds for, you can absolutely request a meeting with us for those exact purposes. Can you give a comment on teachers' rights? So I was listening to the California Teachers Association, and they were talking about the American with Disabilities Act, and they were asking if the act covers teachers who are fearful of coming back. And the answer to that in the short term was no, because age is not considered a disability, which it shouldn't. So it doesn't cover. So we have to make sure that our districts are really looking towards those teachers who are not ready to come back, and finding how they can be utilized in the district. Because they shouldn't, I don't want to say quote unquote punished, but we shouldn't say, you know, because you're not coming back, you're not going to be able to teach. We have to figure out a solution for them. So the COVID funds are part of the ESSA funds, the elementary and secondary funds, and those will be released once again. Once they will start being released from the Department of Ed in July directly to the districts. And once again, the amount that every district is going to be receiving is listed on the California Department of Education website of how much they should be expecting to be receiving. And that is based upon your Title I allotments. And just thinking about it, you know, looking at all the funds, it's about an 80% of what your school district received in Title I funds. It's about 80% of those funds for the most part, but definitely look on the CDC, the California Department of Education website. It'll tell you how much your district should be receiving. But once again, we have to make sure that the district knows all the department's needs, and that all the departments make their requests so that everybody's voice is being heard. So that those funds can be utilized in a way that meets all the needs. So that will have to be a discussion district by district of how those funds are being utilized. So on-site remote, this one is the most popular, and it also referred to as the AB model. And this is where you kind of break your students off into platoons. You have a platoon A and a platoon B. So platoon A could be 20 students, platoon B could be 20 students. And so platoon A would be face-to-face in school on Mondays and Wednesdays, getting instruction from their teacher. And then Wednesdays, Tuesdays and Thursdays, they would be home distance learning. And then the teachers, platoon B, they would be distance learning on Monday and Wednesday, and then face-to-face on Tuesday and Thursday. And then on Friday, they would be at home, either catching up on the week's work, but they would be at home. So everybody would be at home on Friday, and the teachers would be using their time to prepare on Friday, or doing some PD to prepare for more techniques for that distance learning. But that's a model that we're seeing become more and more popular, because that will meet the needs of the social distancing. That would meet the needs of a variety of different things in the classroom. But we do also still have to be mindful of making sure students know that they still have to wash their hands. Just because they do have 6 feet apart, that doesn't mean that they can't, that hygiene isn't there. So we have to constantly be reminding them to wash their hands. I believe the California Department of Education stated every hour the students should be washing their hands, and outside every door there should be a hand washing station, or something very close to that. So we have to be mindful of that, even when we do this on-site remote model, also known as the hybrid model. But we do have to start thinking about what are we going to do? Who's going to be watching the students when they're working from home? Not every parent is going to be able. Not every parent has a one parent who works and one parent who stays home. And we also have to be mindful of what are we going to do about that. And so that childcare issue does have to be taken into consideration during these models as well. And then we have to also make sure that our teachers understand that we're not trying to double your workload. We're not trying to say you have to teach hybrid and you have to teach face-to-face in 2 different ways. So showing them how to streamline that model of how they can teach face-to-face while at the same time asynchronously teaching the students back at home. And then utilizing your LMS. And we always say, and I'm actually going to be doing a session tomorrow on remote teaching through Google Classroom, having teachers make sure, no matter if they're face-to-face or hybrid, that they're posting the work that they're expected to be done for the week, like on Sunday night or Monday morning. And that's the only time they post that work, so that there's no question of, oh, did I miss this? Did I miss that? And also posting by week, not by sections or not by topics, so that everything is located in one section. So there's a variety of things we need to consider when looking at this hybrid on-site remote model. Would anybody like to add anything or comment on anything that was just said? Yeah, and I noticed, Melanie, we're talking about PE. Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one as well. I mean, I taught 8th grade science for 10 years, and there's nothing like a junior high a locker room during PE. It's sometimes it can be chaos and it could be nuts, and trying to keep them separated and make sure you're scheduling lockers that are 6 feet. It's gonna be a situation. So we have to make sure we're mindful of, do we have to conduct PE in our traditional manner? What can we do and still meet the needs of PE? And are the requirements for PE hours, or those requirements from California, going to be still mandated, or they're going to be laxed a little bit in the situation? So these are all things that we need to be looking at coming down the pipe. And we've also seen situations where some schools have said, you know what, we're going to teach the classes on site that have to be taught on site. Especially a lot of colleges are doing this as well. You know, like the hands-on classes, the classes that have to be taught face-to-face, and the classes that quote unquote can be conducive to distance learning, those are going to be done distantly. But once again, it's all about our localities. It's all about our districts. It's all about our preparedness. But we still have to make sure that all the scenarios are talked about in depth, so that the best decision can be made. And as Melanie pointed out, making sure that there is community comments on everything, so that everything is open to discussion on all of these matters. And once again, before we move on, would anybody like to unmute and leave any comments for the group? I see that there's a big chat going on in the chat room, but if anybody would like to speak up, we would love that as well.
Hi, this is Jamie, and I'm in La Cañada, California, just north of Los Angeles.
Excellent.
And,
hi, Jamie.
Hi. You know, one of the things that I'm recommending for our team to do, I'm the Chief Technology Officer for our district and taught English before that, is if we analyze like all the pain points we face during distance learning and focus on those, they don't really change whether or not we're in school or at home. And some of the challenges we faced were kind of uneven delivery of instruction, right? Everybody was learning, like you said, we jumped out of the plane and we're learning to skydive. So we focus on that, like, you know, really shoring some of those pain points up. We look at really improving collaboration. We had some huge successes with grade level teams who are producing content and sharing it among their students. That was amazing. I mean, I think that's what we hope for out of a pandemic, is that type of collaboration. And so that's what I'm recommending, is we just analyze the things like you're saying, even with supplies, what would benefit us out of this pandemic? And are there things that we know are good for kids? That's where we need to be spending our energy. But I fear, you know, we're spending a lot of time focusing on bill schedules and how this is going to work and that isn't going to work. But the one constant we do know is we're going to have some kids on a distance learning track. We're going to have parents fearful of what's going to happen and leaving our schools. So shoring up our distance learning experiences for our kids, I think, is the biggest thing we can do. And again, it's collaboration, it's our instructional models, and it's communication, just really providing clear guidelines.
No, absolutely. And I love all of that as well. Clear guidelines is key, right? You know, even though teachers don't like to be kind of told you have to use this, you have to use that, giving them some key guidelines on this is a great practice, this is a great tool, this is how it'll benefit you, is absolutely important, not only for the teacher, but for the district students as well. If you're giving every teacher the choice to either use Microsoft Teams or Google Classroom, those students are going to start getting confused, not knowing which class to go into, what to do, like that kind of thing. So having a common LMS across the district to maintain uniformity is going to be incredibly important as well. And I saw Phil mentioning things about PE. That's absolutely right, Phil. I've seen some PE classes asking the students, like especially in the high school level, who do have access to cell phones or smartphones, to do some runs, and the app will actually track how long you've gone, and all they do is upload that track, and this is how much I've gone. I've seen some videos on YouTube utilizing Flappy Bird's AI, where you actually do push-ups and move the Flappy Bird just by moving up and down. So you turn this game into an activity that is considered to be PE. So there's a lot of ways to do PD in the distance. You just have to be creative. And also we have to make sure we focus about this. And I know equity is a huge issue, but we have to focus on, if they do have cell phones, is there something we can do for PE that we can utilize what the students already have? So be creative and ask the community and get their involvement. So Jamie, I love every suggestion that you said. So thank you so much for giving us your viewpoint. So we really, really, really appreciate that. You know, one thing we haven't talked about, because, you know, I come from the tech side, I don't come from transportation, is transportation. That is going to be an absolute difficult issue, because if you are having, let's say, an AM PM model where you have half the kids come AM, you have an hour break, and then half the kids come in PM, that's double the amount of time that they have to run their routes. And then if you have to do social distancing on the bus, meaning one kid every other seat, now you have to triple the number of routes to make up for that social distancing. So we call that the 2x3 model. That's 6 times the routes that you would normally have. So making a decision on what's best for the kids is absolutely important, but also making a decision on what's feasible if you can't hire more bus drivers or get more buses. So we have to bring transportation always into this factor as well. The next one is that adjusted or flexible schedule. And you know, this would allow, you know, this would all have to have transportation taken into this consideration. This would be that AM PM model, bringing half the kids in the AM and half the kids in the PM. You know, we have to make sure we're thinking about all of these things. And we also have to make sure that you know, teachers know, you know, which kids are coming in AM, which kids are coming in PM. And so that's going to be 2 times the amount of classes, really, if you're doing a Google Classroom, that they're going to be teaching. So really taking all these things into consideration. And then also one thing, I think David brought this up earlier, and that is having, especially in secondary, because this is easier in elementary for keeping kids in the same classroom. But in secondary, having the teachers be the ones that are rotating, not the students, to limit the contact in the halls. Because that's also going to be an issue. And we hear all the time that students are saying, I miss school, I miss school. I love hearing that. But when we think about it, are they missing the school, or are they missing being with their friends every day? And so if you are putting them in the classroom and then now saying, oh, be 6 feet apart. Oh, you don't get to go out to PE. Oh, it's going to be a different feeling for them. So making sure students have the expectation of, it's, even though it is face-to-face, it's not going to be the same. And we have to make sure we're abiding by the CDC and California Department of Health guidelines. One of the things that we've talked, our LEAs have talked about, is if you do have like a casting device in your room and there is a splash background that before you log in, have that be some of the hand washing guidelines or things to remember. If you do have digital signage around your campus, utilizing the digital signage for reminders that say, hey, don't forget to stay 6 feet apart, or hey, make sure you're on the painter's tape that's on the ground. Every X is where you should be standing. Reminding the students, because they're going to need constant reminders of this new normal coming into this face-to-face environment. We have to make sure, because we all know how students are, they want to play. We're social beings, and they're going to want to be next to each other. And so teachers are going to have to be constantly reminding, hey, sorry, we can't do that. Sorry, we can't do that. It's going to be a necessity in those face-to-face. And then finally, if you go full remote, and at times, if the state and the California Department of Education of this, if there is COVID cases in your school, you might have to shut down for a period of time. And if you shut down, and that's not saying the entire district, but those schools that are having those cases, if you shut down, you're gonna have to go full remote. So making sure your teachers are still prepared to go full remote at a moment's notice, but they're prepared at that moment's notice. So we have to make sure that they don't see the scenario chosen at the beginning of the year as the long-term solution, because there might be times that it needs to be shut down and full remote needs to be a necessity. So we have to keep that in mind as well. And then one thing we haven't talked about, and we do have a field solution architect who's doing a session on this as well, is the CDC guidelines and the California Department of Health and California Department of Education says all students and staff should be checked for temperatures upon entering the school. Now, I came from a junior high that had 800 students. If you have to line all 800 students up and get temperature checks through, that's going to take almost all day, and the learning is not going to happen. So what is that preparedness that you're ready for these temperature checks? If you are going to be purchasing devices, how many students per minute can they check? Is it 10 students per minute? Is it 25 students per minute? What are you going to do about guests coming on campus? So these are also things that need to be talked about through administration, because those are some of the guidances. Now, the final slide on here are just additional considerations that needs to be taken into account. And some of them we have talked about. Equity is key. If you are going to have distance learning, or you are going to have a rotating or hybrid model, you have to make sure that all students not only have access to the devices, but also have access to hotspots as well. And so I did include a link up here if you want to click on it when you get your resources, about some Khajiit hotspots that are finally available, because they've been gone for such a long time, but some Khajiit solutions that can be utilized for having hotspots for those students who do not have internet access at home. Temperature checks, like we just talked about, we have to make sure the district is adopting policies district-wide. It shouldn't be different from one school to the next. So we have to think about, what is the time commitment? What is our goal to getting every student in class? What is the time limit? And then start looking for devices that can meet that time limit. And how often? Are you going to be checking every day? That's what the CDC and California Department of Education recommends. Are they going to be checking before they get on the bus? Because think about it, if you get a student on the bus and they get to school and their temperature doesn't check out, how are you going to send them home? Are you going to call the parents? So are you going to check them before the bus? So these are things you need to be thinking about. Physical distancing, once again, how are you going to monitor physical distancing? Are you going to be purchasing those dividers? Are you going to be utilizing outdoor spaces? And transportation. If it is saying one student per every other seat, how are you going to make sure every student has transportation that needs it, but still keep that social distancing? Cleaning procedures. Part of the guidelines say don't share supplies. So how are you going to make sure of that? One of the recommendations is, if you are in an elementary school, having Rubbermaid containers of these are this student's supplies, these are this student's supplies, these are this student's supplies. But in a secondary room, when you have about 180 students rolling through, that could be a different matter. So how are you going to be cleaning the supplies? What supplies need to be cleaned? What tools will be used to clean? So these are some situations. What about high or special needs students, special education students, ELL students? How are we taking those students into consideration? One of my fellow education strategists, Ari, is actually doing a session on that as well. So if you are looking to have those high or special needs students questions answered, she's going to be doing a session like that. It's either today or tomorrow, but she's doing a session on both days. I have to double check to see when the ELL one is. The visitor screening, are we going to allow every visitor on campus? How are we going to check them for temperature? What are we going to do? Bathrooms, are we going to let students go to the bathroom whenever they want? Are we going to have somebody ready to clean as soon as they leave? What are we going to do there? PPE, once again, the guidance says all students should be wearing a mask, even though that's going to be a local decision. If you follow that guidance, what are you going to do if students don't show up with a mask? Are you going to have extra supplies available? What are you going to do if the student doesn't show up and all your supplies are depleted? These are things we have to think of. A lot of things to think about. I think Melanie really hit the head on the board meetings, or talking about physical town halls, but sports. I know the CIF just released guidance on starting up sports again. Once again, I'm talking about localities on if you can have 10 students or more than 10 students and what can you do. So that's going to have to be looking into. Hand sanitizer stations, how many and where. The pandemic planning that your local Department of Health has put in, what are you going to do to follow those? If your school is really big into exchange programs, are you going to continue to support those programs, or are you going to put them off for a little bit? Travel, if you have to have students travel for field trips or between schools, if you have a CTE class at one school and your home school's in another one, how is that travel going to be taken into account? How are we going to make sure that morale is still high, even though they're constantly being told, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands? How are we going to constantly keep that morale and ensure that their culture is being taken into account? And then finally, that at-risk populations are teachers who are at that at-risk age level, or they have an at-risk health problem, or a teacher who isn't at risk but is taking care of an at-risk parent. How are we going to accommodate them to make sure that they are being utilized correctly in the district, but not feel that they're going to be putting their parents at risk? So these are all things that everybody's looking. And once again, that's why I started this session off saying it always seems impossible until it's done, because looking at this, it looks like a chess game that is unrecognizable. It's like that Star Trek chess game that's 3 levels that nobody understands how to play. It's crazy. There's so many different layers and levels that go beyond technology that have to be thought about in districts, but we have to still think about each and every one. And once again, all of these resources are available to you. Just make sure you go to cdwgets.it/feedback. I also included all the links to everything that we got information from, the Return to School Roadmap, the CDC guidance, everything. And then we also included a link to our CDW Gets podcast that we record every week on information that we see schools are asking for. And those podcasts are 25 minutes or less. And so we try to get as much information in a short amount of time that you can do as possible. I love doing podcasts on my morning walk and morning run. So I figure a lot of educators would love to do that as well. So I want to go ahead and just open the floor up to anybody who has any comments, anything that you're doing, anything that you're looking forward to, anything at all, since this is a roundtable discussion. Now, and I know that was a lot of quick information, but I'll tell you, we've gone through thousands of pages of reopening guidelines from all these different schools, Maryland and Virginia and Washington and Oregon and California, and we try to condense it into an easy to read document for anybody who would like access to it. So everything is from a lot of aggregated information, but it's always going back based. So this one, since we are California strategists, we based a lot of the information off the California Department of Education guidance, but we definitely always refer back to the CDC, since that is a national guidance for the Centers of Disease Control. And as always, through CDW, I'm available to chat. Consultations, collaborations, and there is no charge for my services. I'm a value add from CDW if your district is currently already doing business with CDW. So I can work with yourselves, I can work with your TOSA teams, I can work with your EdTech teams, I can work with your curriculum and instruction teams. So my role for CDW is to provide resources to show that CDW doesn't just want to sell you solutions. We want to be part of your solution. We want to make sure that anything you're doing, anything that you have, anything that you're thinking about has someone like myself who can give you a perspective that's a national perspective, not just a local or California based perspective. But I'd love to say thank you so much for joining us today. We love the fact that Santa Cruz County Office of Ed decided to still go full remote, and Jeff and I have put hours and hours into this to make this the most resourceful virtual summit that you can possibly attend, so that you leave this saying, I'm so glad I attended, instead of saying I could have spent my time better elsewhere. So I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything you do for our students, everything you do for our teachers, and everything you do for the benefit of the future. And I just want to say that I have so much love for education that it's unsurmountable. So I just want to say again, thank you so much. And it was a pleasure getting to learn with you today.
Hey, and Joe, I saw there were a couple of questions in the chat. As far as everyone, having the ability to reach out to you, if they fill out the CDW Gets It survey at the bottom left, that will then put them in contact with you from that perspective, or I just want to make sure that everyone in the group knows. Okay.
Absolutely, yes. So yeah, if you fill out that survey on the feedback, you'll get an instant response with the link to this session, and you'll get my contact information as well. And you can always shoot me an email saying, hey, we'd love to connect, and we'll find a time, and we'll of course do a virtual connection for any of your needs at all. We're here to help, and we're here to make sure that any of your plans, we can do anything we can to make sure that the outcome of your plans meets your expectations. And that is our goal, is just to be a helpful resource for all of our educators during these trying times. And I'm gonna be using this same room for the same session again for the breakout number 2. So I'm gonna be hanging out in here the entirety of the time until the next one starts. So if anybody wants to hang behind and ask any kind of questions, please let me know. But we will be starting breakout number 2 at 10:35.
And then Mary Helen Beaver, it looks like you're asking about recording sessions that you were unable to attend. So yes, these are all being recorded by Santa Cruz County Office of Ed, and they will be made available on the website in a few days' time. So it takes a little bit to pull all the downloads and upload everything up to the website, but you guys should be able to tune in shortly after. And I assume that Jason will be providing some sort of feedback and some sort of follow-up forms to everybody that attended the conference. So.
Yep, absolutely. And just one more thing, we're very proud of the CDW Gets podcast. We've been planning it for about 1.5 years, and we finally got approval to do it. And we are always taking requests from educators and customers on what they would love to hear about. So if there's any topic that you would like to be heard or for us to cover, please absolutely let us know. I'm gonna go ahead and post my. Once again, if you fill out the form, you'll get my email right off the bat, but I'll post my email in here as well in our chat, so that if you ever want to talk or send me recommendations on what we should cover, you can absolutely do that. Or if your school is doing some amazing things, we're always looking for schools to be featured on the podcast as well, to feature stories and success stories going forward.